The wind off the Black Hills had teeth that autumn, and Cole Whitmore had not eaten in 3 days. His face was lean and angular, the face of a man carved by seasons of hardship, a strong jaw shadowed with several days of dark stubble, deep-set brown eyes that still held something gentle in them, despite the desperation that gnawed at his gut. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn canvas duster the color of dried earth, a battered brown hat pulled low against the cold, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard country. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar. He was not old, perhaps 30, perhaps younger, but the plains had aged him the way plains age everyone who dares to live on them honestly. His horse, a bony roan mare he called Delia, was in no better shape than her rider. Cole sat motionless in the saddle at the edge of a tree line, looking down into the shallow valley where a Sioux encampment spread along the bank of a narrow creek. The lodges were painted with figures of horses and buffalo and birds whose wings stretched wide across the hide. Smoke rose from cooking fires. The smell of roasting meat drifted upward through the cold air and reached Cole Whitmore with the force of a revelation. He was not a bad man. That is the first thing that must be said, and it must be said plainly before everything else. Cole Whitmore had been a ranch hand, then a drover, then a hired man on 3 different spreads that all went under within 6 months of taking him on. Not by any fault of his, but by the particular cruelty of a drought year that had broken the backs of half the ranchers between the Platte River and the Canadian border. He'd sold his saddle blanket 2 weeks ago to a settler woman for 50 cents and a half loaf of bread that was already going hard. He'd traded his rifle for 2 nights in a boarding house in a town whose name he'd already forgotten. He had his revolver, an old Colt single action that had belonged to his father. And he had Delia, and he had the kind of hunger that stops being merely physical and becomes something metaphysical. A hollowness behind the ribs that makes a man's thoughts go sideways. He told himself he would only take enough to survive. He told himself the camp was large, that the people there would not miss a few strips of dried meat or a piece of flatbread. He told himself a great many things as he dismounted quietly at the tree line, tied Delia to a pine branch, and moved on foot down the slope toward the outermost edge of the encampment. If you are enjoying this story and want more tales of the Old West delivered to your ears, consider subscribing to the channel. Every story we tell here is crafted to take you back to those dusty, dangerous, honorable days when men lived and died by their word and their aim. The camp was not as quiet as it appeared from a distance. Children ran between the lodges, their laughter high and bright in the cold air. Dogs moved with the loose-jointed ease of animals that have never been beaten. Women worked at various tasks, scraping hides, grinding something in stone bowls, tending the fires. Cole moved along the eastern edge of the encampment, keeping to the shadows of the largest lodges, his heart hammering so loud in his chest that he was certain someone would hear it. He found what he was looking for near the 3rd fire from the end, a wooden rack on which strips of meat had been hung to dry, and beside it, a clay pot with a cloth over its mouth. Without allowing himself to think about what he was doing, Cole reached out and grabbed a generous handful of the dried meat. He was reaching for the clay pot when a voice behind him said, in clear and unaccented English, "I would not do that if I were you." Cole froze. He turned slowly. The man standing behind him was tall, nearly as tall as Cole himself, and broad through the chest and shoulders in a way that suggested a physical power that had not diminished with age, though his age was considerable. His face was deeply lined, with prominent cheekbones and dark, steady eyes that held no anger in them, only a measuring quality, like a man evaluating the weight of something he has picked up and is deciding whether to keep. His hair was black streaked with silver and fell to his shoulders. He wore a blanket robe over his shoulders and leggings of worked deerskin. He carried no weapon that Cole could see, which somehow made him more imposing rather than less. Several men had materialized behind and to either side of the tall man. Young men, warriors by their bearing, with expressions that ranged from cold assessment to barely contained fury. One of them had a bow with an arrow already nocked, held with the casual readiness of a man who has done this 10,000 times. Cole Whitmore stood with dried meat in his fist and understood completely that he might be about to die. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out stripped of everything except their plainest meaning. "I am sorry. I haven't eaten. I wasn't going to take much. I know that doesn't make it right." The tall man regarded him for a long moment. The cold wind moved through the camp. A child somewhere laughed again, then went quiet as if hushed by an adult who had noticed something in the air. "Come," the tall man said. It was not an invitation. Cole Whitmore walked where he was directed, through the encampment, past the eyes of everyone in it, which was a particular kind of shame he had not previously experienced. The shame of being seen at your lowest by strangers, until he was brought to a lodge larger than the others. The tall man ducked through the entrance. Cole followed. The warriors remained outside. Inside, the lodge was warm and dim, lit by a small central fire. Furs and robes were arranged around the circumference. Painted images covered the interior walls. Battles, hunts, journeys, the kind of images that are not decoration, but record. The tall man sat cross-legged by the fire and gestured for Cole to sit across from him. Cole sat, still holding the stolen meat in his fist, not knowing what to do with it. "Put it down," the tall man said, not unkindly. Cole set the dried meat on the ground beside him. "My name is Charging Elk," the man said. "I am the principal chief of this band, and you came into my camp and stole from my people." "Yes," Cole said. There was nothing else to say. "Why did you not come to us and ask?" The question landed on Cole Whitmore with the weight of something he would carry for the rest of his life. He sat with it for a moment before answering. "I didn't think you'd give me anything," he said. "I'm a white man. I thought you'd run me off, or worse." Charging Elk was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You thought we were savages." "No," Cole said. Then honestly, "Maybe. I don't know what I thought. I was hungry and I was afraid and I wasn't thinking clearly." Another silence. The fire popped. Outside, the sounds of the camp continued, life continuing without pause as it does. "You are not the first white man to take from us rather than ask," Charging Elk said. His voice was even and without particular emotion, the way a man speaks when he is recounting historical facts rather than expressing feelings about them. "Most who come to take do not come hungry. They come with rifles and papers and flags. At least you came with only your hunger." Cole did not know what to say to that either. Charging Elk called out something in Lakota. A woman entered the lodge shortly after carrying a bowl and a piece of flatbread. She set it before Cole without looking at him and left. Cole looked at the bowl, then at Charging Elk. "Eat," the chief said. The soup was made from dried meat and something that tasted of wild onions and sage. The flatbread was dense and slightly sweet. Cole ate slowly at first, forcing himself, because a man who has gone 3 days without food must be careful not to destroy himself with the eating of it. But after a few minutes he could not control himself, and he ate the rest quickly, and when the bowl was empty he sat very still with his eyes on the ground. "Thank you," he said. "Now," Charging Elk said, "we will talk about what happens next." What Cole Whitmore expected, what he had been bracing for since the moment of his capture, or his invitation, or whatever it properly was some form of punishment. Exile from the territory. A whipping, perhaps, though that seemed inconsistent with the dignity of the man sitting across from him. He would have accepted either. He had earned either. What Charging Elk said instead was, "My son is sick." Cole looked up. "He has been sick for 2 weeks. The healers have done what they can. There is a medicine man 3 days' ride from here, on the other side of the ridge. He knows a treatment. But we cannot send our own people. There are soldiers moving in that territory, and my men would be killed or taken before they reached the valley." Cole sat with this for a moment. "You're saying you want me to go. I am saying you owe a debt. I am giving you the means to pay it." Charging Elk studied him across the fire with those steady, weighing eyes. A white man can ride through that territory without soldiers stopping him. You will go to the Valley of the Red Rock, find the medicine man whose name is White Crane, and bring back what he gives you. You will do this and your debt will be settled." "And if I don't?" Cole said, not as a challenge, genuinely asking. "Then you are the kind of man who steals from the hungry and will not help a sick child when he has the power to do so," Charging Elk said. "That is punishment enough." Cole Whitmore looked at the empty bowl in his hands for a long moment. He thought about the roan mare tied at the tree line, and the empty plains stretching north and south and west, and the particular emptiness he'd been carrying in his chest that had nothing to do with the hunger in his stomach. And he said, "Tell me about the Valley of the Red Rock." He was given fresh provisions for the journey, more than he had expected, enough to sustain both himself and the mare for the 3 days there and back. He was given a description of the route and landmarks to watch for, delivered by a young warrior named Running Antelope, who spoke little English but drew an extraordinarily precise map in the dirt of the lodge floor. He was given a small bundle of items to present to White Crane as identification, items whose significance Cole did not understand, but whose arrangement had the quality of ceremony about it. Before Cole left, Charging Elk walked with him to where Delia was tied at the tree line. The chief examined the mare briefly, ran a hand along her flank, said something in Lakota. "She's tired," Cole said. "We've both been through it." "She will last the journey if you do not push her," Charging Elk said. He looked at Cole directly. "Do you understand what I am asking of you? You're asking me to bring medicine back for your son. I am asking you to be something other than what you were this morning," the chief said. "That is a harder thing." Cole rode north and west into the broken country along the ridgeline, following Running Antelope's dirt map translated into landmarks: a double-topped butte, a dry creek bed running east-west, a stand of twisted cottonwoods that the young warrior had rendered with surprising accuracy in the soil of the lodge. The cold deepened as the day progressed, and by mid-afternoon, the sky had taken on the yellowish cast that in this country precedes snow. He made camp that first night in the shelter of a rock outcropping, built a small fire, and lay awake for a long time staring at the stars when the clouds permitted it. He thought about Charging Elk's son, whose name he did not know, lying sick in a warm lodge, while his father sent a white stranger he had every reason to distrust on an errand that his own people could not safely run. He thought about what that decision had cost the chief, the indignity of it, the risk of it, the particular weight of being reduced to dependence on the mercy of a thief. He thought, too, about what the chief had said, that most who come to take do not come hungry. Cole had been carrying that sentence since it was spoken to him, turning it over in his mind the way you turn a stone to see what is underneath. On the second day, he crossed into the country the soldiers were patrolling, and he understood what Charging Elk had meant. Twice he encountered cavalry patrols, groups of 8 or 10 men moving in formation across the open ground, their horses fresh and well-fed, their expressions carrying the blank certainty of men who believed entirely in their own authority. Both times, Cole nodded to the officer in charge and was waved through with barely a glance. A white man on a worn horse was a common enough sight. He was invisible by virtue of his ordinariness. He tried to imagine what would have happened if one of Charging Elk's warriors had ridden this same ground. He did not have to imagine very hard. The Valley of the Red Rock was exactly as described, a canyon carved into the earth by some ancient water that no longer ran there, the walls genuinely and deeply red, the color of brick or old blood, with streaks of ochre and cream running through them. At the canyon's mouth, sheltered by an overhang of rock, was a small dwelling that seemed to have grown from the canyon wall rather than been built against it. White Crane was very old. Cole could not have estimated his age with any precision. He had the agelessness that sometimes comes to people who have lived long enough in the same landscape that they begin to resemble it. He was small and slight, with eyes that were filmed with age but sharp behind the filming. He wore a robe decorated with symbols Cole did not recognize, and carried himself with the unhurried gravity of a man who has nowhere more important to be than where he already is. Cole presented the bundle of items. White Crane examined them, looked at Cole for a long moment, and nodded. They communicated with difficulty. White Crane spoke no English, and Cole spoke no Lakota, but some negotiations transcend language. Cole explained, through gesture and the quality of his urgency, that a child was sick and time was limited. White Crane nodded as if this was already known to him, which perhaps it was. The old man prepared what he needed over the course of several hours. Cole watched without comprehension as herbs and roots and powders were combined with the deliberateness of a man who has done this particular thing many times, whose knowledge of it runs so deep that the individual steps have become unconscious, the way a master carpenter no longer thinks about how he holds a plane. The result was a small clay vessel sealed with wax and wrapped in cloth, accompanied by a series of gestures whose meaning Cole committed to memory with fierce concentration, because he understood that how the medicine was administered mattered as much as the medicine itself. Before Cole left, White Crane did something unexpected. He reached into a pouch at his belt and took out a small object, a carved stone figure of a running horse, and pressed it into Cole's palm. Cole looked at it, then at the old man. White Crane spoke in Lakota, several sentences, watching Cole's face as he spoke as if gauging comprehension. Cole did not understand the words, but he understood the gesture, the weight of it, the quality of intention behind it. He closed his fingers around the stone horse and put it in his shirt pocket. The return journey was harder. The snow that had threatened since the first afternoon arrived on the second night of the return trip, blowing horizontally out of the northwest, reducing visibility to almost nothing, and turning the ground to a uniform white that obliterated landmarks. Cole navigated by memory and instinct, and by Delia's own sense of direction, which proved more reliable than his. The mare pushed through the storm with a determination that Cole found both humbling and moving. She was tired, had been tired for weeks, but she kept going. He arrived back at the encampment on the morning of the fourth day, later than promised, arriving out of a clearing snowstorm with frost in his beard and the clay vessel clutched inside his coat against his body to keep it from breaking in the cold. Charging Elk met him at the edge of the camp. The chief's face, as Cole dismounted stiffly and produced the vessel, showed nothing, and then showed something, briefly, that Cole understood was not nothing at all, but rather the precise opposite. "Come," Charging Elk said. Charging Elk's son was perhaps 12 years old, dark-eyed and thin from the illness, but he was breathing steadily when Cole entered the lodge, and his eyes tracked movement. Charging Elk administered the medicine according to the gestures White Crane had taught Cole, which Cole demonstrated as best he could, and then sat beside his son with the patience of a man who has learned through long experience that some things cannot be hurried. Cole waited outside. Running Antelope brought him food and, unexpectedly, a blanket. The young warrior said nothing, but his expression had shifted from the cold assessment of their first meeting to something that acknowledged, without exactly welcoming, the presence of a man who had done a thing that was asked of him. By evening, the boy's fever had broken. Charging Elk found Cole where he was sitting outside, watching the last light leave the sky over the plains. "He will recover," the chief said. Cole nodded. He did not trust himself to speak for a moment. "You came back," Charging Elk said. It was an observation rather than a surprise, but it carried weight. "I said I would." Many men say things. Cole thought about that. "I know," he said. "I know that." Charging Elk sat beside him. They were quiet for a while, watching the dark come on. The camp sounds continued around them, fire and voice and the movement of daily life. In the distance, a coyote called once and fell silent. "My son will want to know who brought the medicine," Charging Elk said. "Just a man who owed a debt," Cole said. "That is not nothing." "No," Cole said. "I don't suppose it is." The chief reached into a fold of his robe and produced something, a small bundle of folded leather tied with sinew. "For your journey," he said. "Provisions, and something else." Cole opened the bundle. Inside, along with dried meat and cornmeal enough to last a week, was a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and held it toward the firelight. It was a letter, written in a careful hand, in English. It bore a notation at the top that Cole recognized as belonging to the Indian Agency at Fort Lincoln, and it was signed, among other signatures Cole did not recognize, by a name that carried authority in this territory. It attested that the bearer had performed a service of considerable value to the people of Charging Elk's band and was to be afforded safe passage and assistance throughout the territory. Cole looked at the document for a long time. Then he looked at Charging Elk. "You prepared this before you knew whether I'd come back," Cole said. "I prepared it because I believed you would come back," the chief said. "There is a difference." Cole folded the paper carefully and put it inside his coat. "Why?" he said. "Why did you believe that? You don't know me." Charging Elk considered the question with the same unhurried seriousness he brought to everything. "You apologized," he said finally. "Most men who are caught taking what is not theirs make excuses. They become angry, they try to justify. You said you were sorry without any decoration. That is a rare thing." Cole thought about this. The coyote called again, further away now. "I came here to steal food," he said. "I'm not exactly a man of honor." "Honor is not a permanent condition," Charging Elk said. "It is a series of choices. You made a poor one this morning. You made better ones afterward. This is how it works for everyone." It was not an absolution, and Cole did not take it as one. But it was something, a framework, a way of thinking about the moral accounting of a life that he would carry with him for a long time. He stayed 2 more days in the encampment, not as a prisoner, not exactly as a guest, but in some category between the two that gradually moved, over those 2 days, toward the latter. Running antelope showed him how to set snares for rabbits with a kind of patient expertise that suggested he understood Cole would need this skill in the weeks ahead. One of the older women, a grandmother figure whose name he never learned, mended his duster without being asked, sewing the torn left shoulder with stitches so neat they shamed the garment's original construction. Charging Elk's son, whose name was Spotted Eagle, came to Cole on the 2nd day. He was still pale from the illness, but walking, and he carried himself with the straight-backed posture of a boy who has been raised with expectations. He regarded Cole with frankness. "My father says you went to White Crane," Spotted Eagle said. His English, unlike his father's, had the quality of a second language learned recently. Careful, slightly formal, each word placed deliberately. "That's right," Cole said. "Why?" Cole thought about how to answer. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. "And because I owed your father." "You could have ridden away," Spotted Eagle said. "After you left the camp, no one could have caught you." "I know." "So why didn't you?" Cole looked at the boy for a moment. "Because that would have made me a certain kind of man," he said. "And I didn't want to be that kind of man anymore." Spotted Eagle considered this with the gravity that children bring to philosophical questions when they have recently been close to dying. Then he nodded, as if the answer satisfied a calculation he had been working through. "My father says you are welcome to return," the boy said, "if you pass this way." Cole left on the morning of the 3rd day. Delia was rested and had been fed well, and her step was lighter than it had been since before the drought had broken everything. Cole rode south with the provisions in his saddlebags and the letter inside his coat and the stone horse in his shirt pocket. He had no particular destination. That had not changed. But the quality of the absence of a destination had changed. It was no longer the hollow, drifting emptiness of a man who has lost everything and stopped believing in the possibility of anything. It was something more like the openness of a man who has not yet decided what comes next and finds, to his surprise, that he is not afraid of the deciding. 2 weeks later, in the town of Sutherland's Crossing, Cole Whitmore walked into the sheriff's office and presented his letter. The sheriff, a compact and deliberate man named Henry Marsh, read the document twice, looked at Cole over the top of it, and said, "Well, this is unusual." "I expect it is," Cole said. "You know what this says?" Charging Elk is not a man who writes letters of recommendation for white drifters. The fact that he has done so is notable. I helped his family, Cole said. He's a man who repays what he considers a debt. Marsh set the letter down on his desk and looked at Cole steadily. I've got a problem, the sheriff said. Not for the first time, and probably not for the last. Bounty hunters running through Sioux territory causing incidents. The Army doesn't care. The Indian Agency doesn't care. But I care, because the last thing this territory needs is another war, and every incident those men cause pushes things closer to one. He paused. I need someone who can move between those two worlds. A white man that Charging Elk's people won't automatically shoot on sight. You understand what I'm describing? Cole understood exactly what he was describing. It doesn't pay much, Marsh said. The territory's not exactly flush. I didn't ask about pay, Cole said. He was sworn in on a Tuesday morning in November, standing in Marsh's office with his right hand raised and the words of an oath rising in the cold air of the room. Words that were not complicated. To uphold the law, to protect the people of this territory, all the people of this territory, but whose weight he felt completely, the way you only feel the weight of a thing when you have recently understood what you are capable of without it. He rode out that afternoon. The plains spread in every direction, vast and indifferent and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are entirely themselves without apology. The sky was very blue. The first snow of the real winter was still weeks away. He thought about Charging Elk sitting across the fire from him, feeding him when he had every reason not to, sending him on an errand of trust when he had no particular reason to expect that trust to be honored. He thought about the stone horse in his shirt pocket. He still had it. He would carry it for years. And the old man White Crane pressing it into his palm with words Cole could not understand but did not need to. He thought about Spotted Eagle asking him why he had not simply ridden away, and his own answer, which had surprised him with its simplicity when he heard himself say it. Because that would have made him a certain kind of man, and he was choosing to be a different kind. The roan mare moved beneath him with her easy ground-eating stride, and the land opened before them, and Cole Whitmore rode into the afternoon with the particular feeling of a man who has found, unexpectedly and in the least likely circumstances, the beginning of something. It is worth saying what happened in the years that followed, because the story does not end in November on those open plains, though it might have. Cole Whitmore served under Henry Marsh for 4 years, during which time he made a dozen trips through Sioux territory on various errands that ranged from diplomatic to dangerous, always returning, always delivering whatever had been entrusted to him. His reputation with Charging Elk's people grew slowly, the way genuine reputations do, not through any single spectacular act, but through the accumulation of consistent behavior, the unexciting and reliable pattern of a man who does what he says he will do. In the spring of the 3rd year, during a negotiation over water rights that might otherwise have ended with violence, Cole Whitmore stood between a group of ranchers and a group of Charging Elk's warriors in a dry creek bed and talked for 3 hours until something that resembled an agreement had been reached. It was not a perfect agreement. No agreement reached in 3 hours between people with centuries of grievance between them is perfect. But it held, and the spring passed without bloodshed, and that was not nothing. Charging Elk, when Cole reported back to him, said only, "You still carry the stone horse." Cole touched his shirt pocket. "I do." "White Crane gave it to men he believed would find their way," the chief said. "He did not give it to many." Cole did not know what to say to that, as was increasingly the pattern in his conversations with Charging Elk. "My son will be a chief someday," Charging Elk said. "He speaks well of you." "He asks good questions," Cole said. The old chief smiled, a rare expression that transformed his face briefly into something younger, warmer. "He learned that from his mother," he said. The years moved as years do, with the particular mixture of boredom and crisis that constitutes most of a life honestly lived. Cole acquired a small house at the edge of Sutherland's Crossing. He kept a horse better than Delia, though Delia lived to a considerable age and died of nothing more dramatic than time, on a warm afternoon in the paddock behind the house, which is a good way to go. He acquired, slowly and without particularly intending to, a reputation as a man who could be sent into difficult situations and trusted to return with something other than a war. He was not celebrated for this. The work of preventing conflict is invisible in a way that the work of waging it is not. No ballads were written about the dry creek bed negotiation. No newspaper carried the story of the dozen quiet journeys through Sioux territory that had kept the peace along that stretch of the border for 4 years. History, as it was recorded in those days, did not have room for stories about what did not happen. But the people who lived in that territory knew. Both kinds of people, on both sides of whatever line the maps were drawing. And sometimes, that is enough. Before we reach the end of this story, if you've made it this far and found yourself moved by Cole Whitmore's unexpected journey from theft to trust, from hunger to something like wholeness, subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories like this one waiting to be told. On a September evening, 7 years after the morning he had crouched at the edge of a Sioux encampment, with dried meat in his fist and his heart hammering with shame and desperation, Cole Whitmore sat on the steps of his small house and watched the sun go down over the plains. The sky was doing extraordinary things with color, the particular autumnal performance of orange and crimson, and the deep purple that comes in at the horizon as the light fails. Charging elk had died the previous winter. His passing had been quiet, as the chief had apparently wished. He had simply not woken one morning, which was noted by his family with grief, but not surprise. He had been old, and he had been tired, and he had died in his own lodge, surrounded by his people. There were worse ways. Spotted Eagle was chief now. He was a young man of 20 by then, serious and capable, with his father's measured way of speaking and his mother's sharp and curious intelligence. The transition had been smooth, as such transitions go, which was itself a tribute to the work Charging Elk had done in the years of his chieftainship to prepare his people and his son for exactly this. Cole had attended the morning ceremony, which he was told had not been done for a white man in living memory. He had stood at the edge of it, not participating in the ceremonies that were not his to participate in, but present, which was its own form of respect. Spotted Eagle had found him afterward and said, without preamble, "He considered you a friend." Cole had stood with that for a long moment. "I considered him one," he said. "He said you were the first white man who apologized to him without wanting something in return," Spotted Eagle said. "That's a low bar," Cole said. "Yes," Spotted Eagle said, "it is." Now, on the September steps, watching the extraordinary sky, Cole reached into his shirt pocket and took out the stone horse. He turned it in his fingers, feeling the smooth coolness of it. The weight that was greater than its size suggested. He had been carrying it for 7 years. It had outlasted horses, jobs, a territory's worth of crises, and one remarkable man who had chosen, when he found a hungry thief in his camp, to see not just what the man had done, but what he might yet become. He put the stone horse back in his pocket. The sky finished its performance in the west, and the first stars came out, the way they always do, indifferent to the small human dramas being enacted far below them and entirely beautiful for it. The plains settled into their nighttime quiet. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the ridge and the dark line of trees, there were cooking fires and people going about the business of their lives, and children growing up in a world that was not fair, but was not, perhaps, entirely without the possibility of decency. Cole Whitmore sat on his steps a while longer, listening. Then he went inside, because it was getting cold, and there was work again tomorrow, as there always was, and a man had to sleep. The story of the hungry cowboy who stole from a Sioux camp is not, in the end, a story about theft. It is not a story about hunger, though hunger starts it. It is a story about what a man finds when someone refuses to treat him as only the worst version of himself. When a chief who had every reason for anger chose instead to ask a question. Not what do you deserve, but what are you capable of? Charging Elk knew the answer before Cole did. That is what made him a great chief. And the answer, carried forward across 7 years of small and unspectacular and consequential work, was this: more than you think. More than the hunger and the emptiness and the 3 days without food and the particular despair of a man who has been broken by a drought year and believes himself to be beyond the reach of anything resembling grace. More. Always more. That is the West at its best. Not the duels and the gunfighters and the epic confrontations, though there were plenty of those, but the other story, the quieter one, the story of a starving man and a chief and a sick boy and an old medicine man in a canyon of red rock, and how the thread between them held and what grew along it. Remember that story. It is truer than most.